Welcome to the Physician's Guide to Financial Wellness, the podcast dedicated to helping physicians in Michigan turn their professional success into financial success while enjoying life along the way. And now, here are your hosts, Andrew Mushbaugh and Trent DeBruin.
Hi, everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Physician's Guide to Financial Wellness. This is Trent DeBruin, and I'm joined, as always, by my co-host, Andrew Mushbaugh. And today, we're going to walk you through our list of 10 things you should do if you're within 10 years of retirement. Now, for some of you, that retirement age could be 65 or 70, while for others, it could be on the earlier end of the spectrum, like 50 or 55. But regardless of what it is, retirement is a huge life transition with many things to consider, both financial and non-financial, and we found there are common themes and areas to focus on for anyone beginning to approach retirement, no matter what that retirement age is. So for this episode, we're going to walk you through our list item by item and give you a sense of why each item is important and why it's helpful to tackle it before you actually retire. And Andrew, I know we love what we do and are planning to work until at least age 80, but don't worry, this list still applies even with that retirement age.
Yeah, and I guess 45 things to do if you're within 45 years of retirement might have been a little bit too long of an episode.
True, I guess we'll just stick with the 10 things for now. Well, why don't you get us started with the first item on the list?
Sure. So item number 1 is to take inventory of your current financial situation to see where you stand today. And this is applicable for anyone as a first step, but becomes increasingly important as you get closer to retirement. What this consists of is going through and putting together the list of all your different assets, what you own, and liabilities, what you owe. In other words, your net worth. And this sounds like a basic step, but you'd be amazed by how few people have a clear understanding of their net worth and their household balance sheet, especially if you've had multiple employers, which typically means you have multiple accounts spread out at several institutions. Or maybe you've been paying down your mortgage for 20 years and the balance has substantially decreased since you last checked. So the goal here is to see a snapshot of everything in one place, which the organization and clarity of having everything tracked is often worth it for the peace of mind alone, but it's necessary to do before you can move on to the other areas to address. On top of just seeing the overall snapshot, another benefit of this exercise is to spot planning opportunities. For example, maybe you have 5 to 6 bank accounts that individually don't seem like you have too much in cash, but when you add it all together, you may have a lot more sitting in cash than you realize, which could be put to better use, even if it's just moving it to a high-yield savings account to earn more interest. It also helps you understand exactly what assets or accounts are available to fund retirement and the various tax treatment for the accounts, which becomes even more important as you near retirement and are closer to withdrawing from these accounts. And one last benefit is looking at how other aspects of your situation could change in retirement. For example, if the mortgage is paid off and that debt or cost goes away.
And another fun part of going through that process is that almost without fail, people end up discovering a rogue account they forgot they had floating out there.
I know, it's like clockwork.
And definitely better than finding a rogue loan.
That's true.
So once you have a good understanding of your financial picture, you can move on to the second item of our list, which is to reflect on your current vision of retirement. This is where you move from the financial details to the big picture qualitative aspects of thinking about what you imagine retirement looking like. And we say currently because views and feelings toward retirement can and do change over time, and how you felt 5 years ago may be different than how you feel now, which may even be different from how you'll feel 5 years from now. So it can be a fluid and changing dynamic. But when it comes to visualizing retirement, some people have an extremely clear idea of it. I'm going to retire at age 65 and do X. Well, for others, it may be a bit more hazy. I think I might want to retire at 60, but I'm not sure exactly when I will or what I'll do in retirement. But regardless of where you fall, as you move into that 10 or so year period from retirement, it's important to begin thinking through the details of what it could look like, since you want to have something to aim for, and if you do this in advance, you'll still have time to plan and do things to set yourself up even better for that vision. When thinking about your vision for retirement, one of the biggest and most obvious things is simply the age at which you plan to retire. However, there are other things to consider as well. One of these is your work plans. Do you think you'll retire full stop, move to part-time, or maybe officially retire from your job and do some consulting work on your own terms? Another big thing is where you plan to live. Are you going to stay in the same house, downsize because the kids are gone and you have more space than you need, or maybe move to a different state to be closer to the kids or grandkids? Another often overlooked aspect to reflect on is how you'll spend your days when you no longer have to work and suddenly have a ton of time freed up. Retirement is a big transition, and it can often be challenging if you don't have something to replace the time you previously spent working and give you that socialization, mental stimulation, and sense of purpose that your job provided. So think about what you'll do with your newfound freedom and how you'll fill your days. Maybe it's volunteer work, traveling, leisure activities, more time with family and friends, new hobbies, or anything else. Also think about whether there are any big or special things you want to do in retirement. This could be starting a business, going back to school to pursue a degree or field of study you've always wanted to, moving to another country to live there for a certain period of time, etc. The options are endless and there's no right or wrong answer. Big picture, this second item on our list is all about starting to think about and put together your vision of what exactly retirement will look like for you.
Yeah, it's really helpful to do this well ahead of time, and having a clear idea of what retirement looks like, or what ideally look like, allows you to then quantify out if this vision is feasible. Which leads us to the next step of putting some numbers behind your retirement vision and projecting your future expenses. In order to run projections to see where you are relative to your retirement goal and whether or not you're on track, you need to have an idea of how much you'll spend in retirement, since that's typically going to be the biggest driver or swing factor with retirement projections. Now, we'll add an important caveat here to start by saying that almost no one has a good idea of exactly how much they spend each year, much less what they'll spend in 2, 5, or 10 plus years from now. And on top of that, most people don't enjoy going through any type of budgeting exercise in general, so we'll share a tip for how to get a ballpark idea of spending using your tax return. And this is something that you can refine over time, and as you have more years of tracking, the spending picture becomes more and more clear, at least on average, of what you spend. What the exercise involves is looking at your tax return to back into what you're spending. The reason this is one of the easiest and most accurate ways to track spending is because your tax return doesn't lie. You made X and paid Y in taxes. Whatever is left over had to have either been saved or spent. So what this looks like in practice is taking line 1 of your tax return, which is wages and salaries, and subtract out total taxes paid, both state and federal. This gives you your after-tax income. From there, subtract any money you saved during the year to accounts outside of your employer retirement accounts. This could be bank accounts, 529 college savings accounts, brokerage accounts, or IRAs. Any money, quote-unquote, not accounted for means that you spent it, which is why it gives you a rough estimate of your annual spending and often ends up being more than most people realize. So by doing this, you have a good starting point estimate of your current spending, and from there, it's about thinking through how your spending might change in retirement, which involves going back to the last item Trent touched on and thinking about how your vision of retirement and how your lifestyle might change compared to now. Perhaps there are certain expenses, such as costs associated with kids or a mortgage that might go away in retirement. On the flip side, costs for things like travel and entertainment might increase as you have more time in your hands. Generally speaking, the research shows that the way spending actually evolves in retirement is by following somewhat of a smile pattern, where it jumps up a bit during the early years of retirement as you're more active, typically referred to as the go-go years, and then gradually declines as you age and do less travel and entertainment, the slow-go years, and then increase again late in life due to higher costs associated with things like healthcare and long-term care. So spend a little time thinking about how your situation will change and adjust your current spending to take that into account. Once you have that estimated number, we always recommend adding some additional spending to account for those lumpier, less frequent purchases in retirement, like new cars or home renovations or repairs. Overall, it's better to overestimate spending rather than underestimate it, since it's better to have more options and flexibility to increase spending in retirement than it is to get into a situation where you end up in a tough spot and have to cut back. So after going through this exercise, you should have a rough idea of what your expenses will look like in retirement, which then allows you to run retirement projections.
Andrew, are you excited for retirement, or even a few years from now when you won't have to pay a daycare bill each month for multiple kids?
A sore subject, but yes, I am very, very excited for that.
Well, that discussion of expenses is a great segue to our next item, which is understanding your healthcare options when you retire. And we have an entire episode dedicated to planning for healthcare in retirement, episode number 25. So be sure to check that out if you'd like a deeper dive. But for the purposes of today's episode, we'll just touch on a few of the high-level points. Big picture, one of the most important things to understand is that healthcare changes a lot when you move from your working years to retirement. During your working years, things are pretty straightforward since most people have a health insurance through their employer, and the employer covers most of the cost. When you retire, however, most people lose this employer-provided healthcare and have to come up with a healthcare plan on their own. The nature of that plan is going to be much different depending on whether you retire before or after age 65, which is when you become eligible for Medicare. If you retire prior to 65 and don't have health insurance provided through a working spouse's employer or a retiree health benefit from your former employer, you have to purchase health insurance on your own through the marketplace. For people in this situation, this is when you really realize and appreciate what a great benefit your employer-provided health insurance was, since buying health insurance on your own is expensive, up to $2,000 a month in premiums alone for a couple. Now, there are different planning strategies you can use to manage your taxable income and potentially receive a subsidy from the government, which we elaborate on in episode number 25. But the bottom line is that marketplace coverage is expensive and will be an incremental cost to add to your budget compared to your working years. If you retire after age 65, on the other hand, the cost of health insurance isn't as high since you become eligible for Medicare, but the process can be a bit complicated. To oversimplify things, there are several different parts to Medicare that cover different aspects of healthcare. You pay a monthly premium for certain parts of Medicare, and these various parts combined cover around 80% of your healthcare costs. That still leaves a gap in your health insurance coverage, so most people purchase something called a supplemental policy to cover the remaining 20% that Medicare doesn't. Between the premiums for your supplemental policy and Medicare Part D, for most people, the monthly amount you pay for health insurance on Medicare is higher than what you paid during your working years. So similar to retiring prior to 65, if you retire after 65, you'll also want to add this incremental healthcare cost to your budget. Although, like I said, the incremental cost after 65 is much lower than pre-65. So overall, the key takeaway with this item is to make sure you understand your healthcare options and cost depending on when you plan to retire, and based on that, incorporate them into your retirement expenses, knowing they'll be an incremental cost.
Moving on to a somewhat related topic, the next item on our list is to make sure you have a plan for long-term care. Again, similar to healthcare planning in retirement, we have an entire episode dedicated to this topic, episode number 50, so check that out if you'd like a deeper dive on the topic. But when it comes to long-term care, it's a situation where the likelihood of needing some form of long-term care services at some point in your life is high. For most people, the cost is low, i.e., a shorter stay at a nursing home near the end of life. But for a minority of people, the cost can be quite high, to the extent that it could have a material impact on your retirement plan. So you need to have a plan for long-term care and how you'd address the cost if it materialized. To provide a little context, approximately 70% of people turning 65 today will need some form of long-term care services during their lifetime. And 20% of those people will need care for 2 years or more, with the average of duration of care for men being a little over 2 years and for women just under 4 years. And putting some dollar amounts to it, of the people turning age 65 today, approximately 65% will have zero out-of-pocket long-term care expenses during their lifetime. However, approximately 20% of them will have total lifetime long-term care expenses between $50,000 and $250,000. And the last 10% will have costs of more than $250,000. So you can see why this is an important item to account for when planning for retirement, and it's easy to overlook in the process since at the point you're beginning to think about your retirement, you're most likely younger, healthier, and long-term care seems like a distant event that's hard to imagine at this moment. In terms of how to plan for the potential long-term care costs, there are two ends of the spectrum. There's self-funding, where you are planning to pay out-of-pocket if needed, or you have the option of buying insurance to cover costs. Having said that, it doesn't have to be an all-or-nothing choice, and you can certainly have some combination of the two. In other words, you may choose to cover up to $100,000 or $200,000 of potential long-term care costs through an insurance policy, while feeling comfortable self-insuring anything above that. And while the best approach is unique to the individual, the important thing is that you have a plan for long-term care, and you have that plan before actually retiring. You don't need long-term care insurance, but you do need to have a plan and be comfortable with how you'd cover the costs in the event they materialize. And there are a couple main reasons why you should have your long-term care plan before retiring. One of them is that you still have time to save and accumulate more assets. So if you plan to self-fund long-term care, you can earmark a specific bucket of money for it, and even a target amount you would like to reach. And you have time to build up that bucket between now and when you retire. Another reason is that if your long-term care plan is to purchase insurance, the best time to do it tends to be in your mid to late 50s, when you're younger, healthier, and less likely to be denied coverage, which happens more and more as you age. It's worth noting that long-term care insurance tends to be quite expensive, and this won't necessarily be the best approach for most people. But the point is that there's a window where it's most optimal to buy the insurance, so you do want to be proactive.
And if your long-term care plan is having your kids take care of you, now's a great time to get that in writing so they can't back out on you later.
Absolutely.
So having a plan for long-term care is important, and it can even be helpful to earmark this as a separate goal in retirement, in addition to your annual living expenses and anything else, which is helpful when it comes to running retirement projections, which we'll cover now. And the first point to make here is that it's great to have an understanding of how much you have in retirement assets, how much you're saving each year, what age you want to retire, and what spending and other goals you want to achieve in retirement, but ultimately you have to actually find out whether or not you're on pace to be able to do that, and that's where running retirement projections comes into play. There are different ways to run projections, including online calculators that can be helpful, but the way we do it, and the way we find is most valuable, is by using specialized financial planning software to run a Monte Carlo analysis. The way it works is you start by plugging in a bunch of data for things like your goals, how much you want to spend each year, one-off items like buying a second home or having a certain amount earmarked for potential long-term care costs or any other goals, your retirement age, your life expectancy, how much you currently have saved up for retirement, how much you're saving each year, and an assumption for your expected investment return based on how your retirement money is invested. The software then runs 1,000 different scenarios incorporating various random sequences of investment returns, knowing that you won't earn your average investment return year in and year out, i.e., some years the market will be up 20%, other years it'll be down 10%, etc. Based on those 1,000 scenarios, it then provides a probability of success in terms of what percent of the scenarios ended up with you having at least $1 left at the end of your projected life expectancy. In other words, it gives you a probability of not running out of money in retirement. And the nice thing about software like this is that it gives you a comprehensive picture since it takes into account many different factors, including things like taxes, both the tax treatment of your accounts and the tax rate for the state you expect to retire in, and the ability to assume a changing investment allocation over time if you plan to adjust. Continuing with the theme of this episode, we actually have another podcast episode specifically dedicated to running, understanding, and interpreting retirement projections, episode number 51. But based on running projections for your current situation, you'll have a good sense of whether or not you're on track for retirement. And similar to many of the other items on our list, it's important to do this ahead of retirement, ideally many years before retirement, because the earlier you do it, the more time you have to make changes and adjustments if needed. After running the projections, you may find out you're on track, which is great if that's the case, but you may also find out that you aren't. And if that's the case, you can then start to plan and make adjustments to get yourself on track. This could consist of changing your spending number, adjusting your lumpier goals, your retirement age, or your retirement savings strategy for your remaining working years. But whatever the case, the more time you have to plan, the better.
Yeah, and as Trent just mentioned, one of those potential changes you can make to put yourself on a better path is adjusting your retirement savings strategy. And the best way to do that is to take advantage of tax-deferred retirement accounts and catch-up contributions. We've discussed this topic many times in the past, but when you are saving for retirement, you want to first start by saving to tax-advantaged accounts to the extent you can. And the reason is simple. By saving to these tax-advantaged accounts, you're able to stretch your money further and end up with more money in your pocket by saving on taxes. In other words, you're able to make your money work even harder for you. Depending on your situation, you'll have access to different tax-advantaged retirement accounts. For example, through your employer, you'll most likely have access to a 401k or 403b, and potentially other accounts like a 457b plan or health savings account, which can also act like another retirement account. Outside of your employer accounts, you might also be able to make a backdoor Roth IRA contribution, so you want to understand what your options are here in terms of all the available tax-advantaged savings space, and ensure that money you're saving for retirement is being done using these tax-advantaged accounts as much as possible. Now, the amount you need to save for retirement depends on your retirement goal, and not everyone necessarily needs to max out all of their tax-advantaged retirement accounts, but for many people, especially as you get within 10 years of retirement and your earnings are near a peak level, you'll have the desire and ability to max them out. And for the purposes of our list, one of the big things we want to point out is that for most of these tax-advantaged accounts, the contribution limits increase once you're over 50 years old. At that point, the IRS allows something called a catch-up contribution, where you can start saving even more to these accounts each year. Just to put some numbers to it, once you turn 50, you can start contributing an extra $7,500 a year to a 401k, 403b, or 457b, and an extra $1,000 per year to an IRA or a Roth IRA. So let's say you're a 49-year-old academic physician whose employer offers a 403b and a 457b, and on top of that, you're making an annual backdoor Roth IRA contribution. Well, as soon as you turn 50, you're suddenly able to contribute an extra $16,000 per year to your cumulative retirement accounts, $7,500 more for the 403b and 457b, and $1,000 more for the backdoor Roth IRA, which is obviously a significant increase. Furthermore, let's say you're planning to retire at age 60. That means you'll be able to save an extra $16,000 per year in a tax-advantaged way over each of the next 10 years. So that's more than $150,000 of additional money you're able to save in a tax-advantaged way between now and retirement. And one other thing to keep in mind is that these catch-up contribution limits typically increase over time. So in reality, that additional tax advantaged amount would be even more than what I just mentioned. So bring it back to the big picture. The amount you'll need to save for retirement will depend on your situation, but tax advantage accounts allow you to stretch your retirement savings as far as possible, and the years in between age 50 and retirement provide an opportunity to further accelerate your tax advantage retirement savings due to the catch-up contributions, so be sure to take advantage of them.
And sticking with the topic of retirement accounts, but transitioning slightly to the investment side of things, the next item on our list is to revisit your investment portfolio and asset allocation. The money in the retirement accounts that Andrew just mentioned, and all retirement accounts for that matter, is invested a certain way. And for many people, they choose their investment allocation earlier on in their careers when they're younger and don't necessarily revisit it over time as they get older and start approaching retirement. The reason we mention this is because your investment allocation should be determined by your situation, and your situation naturally changes as you get older. As we've mentioned before when talking about investing, there's a correlation between risk and reward, where stocks have historically had higher reward, better returns, but also more risk. Their prices move around more from year to year. Whereas bonds have had lower reward, lower returns, but also lower risk, or more stable prices year to year. The most important decision with investing, and the thing that's going to impact your investment experience more than anything else, is your ratio of stocks and bonds. Now, the exact ratio will vary depending on your situation, and while one of the factors, your feeling toward risk or your risk appetite, tends to be more consistent over time, other important factors, like your time horizon and your quote-unquote need to take on risk based on where you are relative to your goals, will change significantly over time. So knowing that, one of the important things to do within 10 years of retirement is to revisit your investment portfolio and asset allocation to check whether they're still right for you based on your current situation, and if not, make the necessary changes. Similar to some of the other items, we have an entire episode on whether and how you should change your investment allocation as you approach retirement, episode number 39. So definitely check that out if you want a more detailed discussion. But the key point here is that your situation changes over time, and it's important to check in, refine, and adjust as things change, which is similar for most areas of financial planning.
All right, stepping back from some of the quantitative and financial aspects of preparing for retirement, the last two items on our list are more qualitative in nature, and the first one is to check in with your spouse or partner, if you have one, to make sure you're on the same page. AKA, telling Jenny she needs to work until 81 so I can retire at 42.
Wait, I thought you were working till 81. That means she can probably retire at 42.
Yeah, that would be a good situation too, right? So you want to check in with your spouse to see if you're on the same page. And this one might sound basic, but you'd be amazed at how easy it is to overlook or take it for granted, but also how important it is to give it the proper attention. When it comes to money and finances, we all have our own unique perspectives and feelings based on our own life experiences. And since those experiences are unique to us, there's a good chance that the way we feel about things will be different from others. We see this time and time again in that it may be one spouse is more of a spender and the other is a saver, or one prefers a bigger cash cushion while the other likes to be more aggressive with saving and investing, or one spouse wants to pay for the grandkids' college while the other wants to use that money for a vacation house. Again, no right or wrong answer, but it's helpful to understand both sides so you can settle on a plan that works for both people. And this difference in money scripts often trickles over to differing views of what retirement looks like. Everyone is going to have their own vision based on their personality and life experiences, and it's important to understand both your and your spouse or partner's vision so you know where each person is coming from and can make sure everyone is happy. For example, one spouse might imagine retiring and then traveling the world for weeks at a time throughout the year, while for the other spouse, retirement might mean moving closer to the kids and grandkids and spending more time with them. If you're listening, Mom and Dad, we really appreciate all your help. And in situations like this, there's obviously a big disconnect, and knowing that people's happiness or disappointment is the product of their outcome compared to their expectations, someone's going to have a mismatch and will be disappointed if you don't discuss or address this topic. That example is a more extreme one, but there can be all sorts of variations of this, whether it's how long each spouse works, whether they'll be working part-time after official retirement, where you'll live, how you'll fill your time, or how much you'll spend, and on what types of things. All of them present potential conflict or tension. Now, we're not saying you have to be in total agreement on absolutely everything, and like I mentioned, there's almost always a happy medium you can reach that takes into account both perspectives, but the important thing is that you have these conversations proactively ahead of time, rather than waiting until retirement. As with so many other things on our list, the benefit of doing this proactively is that it provides time to plan and adjust, even if that's just taking the time to work through things and compromise so that you can come up with a mutually agreeable plan in advance. Retirement is a big transition that can often be challenging, and the last thing you want is to have the shock of suddenly finding out that you and your spouse are on a different page about what you want to do and what you envision as that next chapter.
All right, so bringing it home, the last item on our list is somewhat related to what Andrew just discussed, but it's the idea of doing a quote-unquote trial run of your planned retirement to see how it feels. And similar to the point of making sure you're on the same page, the goal here is to avoid a situation of being negatively surprised once you get to retirement. When thinking about retirement, you can have all sorts of ideas about what it's going to feel like, but it's a big transition, and before you retire, you've never actually done it before, so you won't have a true understanding and perspective until you actually do it. Now, just like checking in with your spouse or partner, where there's a chance you have perfect alignment and you're both on the same page, similarly with retirement, there's a chance your vision and expectations align perfectly with reality, and the transition ends up being smooth and you hit the ground running in retirement feeling great. We have a number of clients who are like this, and it always makes us so happy to see it. However, there's also a chance that there is an alignment, and when you get to retirement, you suddenly realize it isn't what you imagined and you aren't happy. Now, you can always make changes, but it's often more difficult to do this reactively once you've already retired rather than proactively before you've retired. So what does this trial run of retirement feel like? Well, it's going to be different for everyone depending on your job and general life flexibility. For example, if you're planning to relocate to another state when you retire, such as the proverbial Midwest retirement to somewhere warm like Florida or Arizona, but you haven't spent a prolonged period of time there, well, before actually pulling the trigger on buying a home and moving there, it might make sense to first rent an Airbnb or VRBO for a month or two to get a true sense of what it's like to live there full time. When it comes to hobbies or activities you plan to do in retirement, while you're still working, try to carve out increasing amounts of time to devote to them and see if it's something you would truly want to fill your time with in retirement. For example, the idea of golfing 5 times a week might sound great while you're working, but you might realize you soon get bored of it once the initial novelty wears off. With work, let's say you have an end date in mind but are somewhat on the fence about it. If your job allows it, a good in-between step could be to first switch from full-time to part-time to see how that feels. You'll have much more time to devote to some retirement interests, and you might also realize how much of your identity and purpose was tied up in your job and career, and how you might not be ready to walk away from it fully. Like I said, the extent to which you'll be able to do this trial run of retirement beforehand will vary depending on your situation, but to the extent you can, it's nice to be able to replicate or experience some of the post-retirement lifestyle before pulling the trigger on it to make sure that the reality of it aligns with your vision. And if it doesn't, as we've mentioned countless times, there's still time to make changes or rework your retirement plans before retiring fully. Well, that covers it with our list of 10 things to do if you're within 10 years of retirement. And I know we went through a lot and it was a longer list and episode, but hopefully the discussion provided some good perspective and things to think about if you're in that phase of starting to approach or think about retirement. It's such a big life transition and we always want it to be a successful one for people. So our goal for this episode is for you to be able to walk away from the conversation with some things to act upon or implement, or at the very least just reflect on to help make retirement a success for you. And to give a quick recap of the list, number 1 is take inventory of your financial situation. Start by putting together your net worth statement, which is your list of what you own, your assets, compared to what you owe, your debt, so you understand what's currently available to fund retirement. Number 2, reflect on your current vision of retirement. Spend some time thinking about what you want retirement to look like, how your lifestyle will change, and whether there are any specific or bigger goals you want to achieve in retirement. Number 3, project your future expenses in retirement. Use the back of the envelope approach we shared to estimate your current spending. Then, based on your reflection on retirement from item number 2, adjust your spending, either upward or downward, to incorporate how things will change in retirement compared to now. Number 4, understand your healthcare options. Health insurance changes materially when you retire, so if you retire before 65, understand your options for bridging the gap until Medicare, and if you retire after 65, understand how health insurance works on Medicare, and based on either scenario, incorporate that extra cost into your retirement spending. Number 5, make sure you have a plan for long-term care. Understand the likelihood and potential cost of long-term care in retirement, and make sure you have a plan for addressing it, whether that's self-funding and earmarking that as a goal, buying insurance, which is typically done in the late 50s, or some combination of the two. Number 6, run retirement projections to see where you stand. based on what you've saved for retirement, how much you're saving each year, what age you plan to retire, and how much you plan to spend in retirement, both on living expenses and other goals. Run projections to understand whether or not you're on track for your current vision of retirement, and if you aren't, then make the necessary adjustments. Number 7, take advantage of tax-advantaged accounts and catch-up contributions. When saving for retirement, the best way to stretch your dollars as far as possible is to save to tax-advantaged accounts. So be sure to understand your options here, and also keep in mind that contribution limits for these accounts increase once you turn 50. Number 8, revisit your investment portfolio and asset allocation. Review your investment portfolio relative to your retirement goal to confirm that it's the right allocation for you, and if it isn't, make the needed adjustments to your investments. Number 9, check in with your spouse or partner to see if you're on the same page. So sit down with your spouse or partner to discuss your respective visions of retirement, and if there's a disconnect between the two, start having the conversations needed to adjust your visions or reach a compromise that allows both of you to be happy. And lastly, number 10, do a trial run of retirement to see how it feels. So to the extent you can, start to replicate some of your planned retirement experiences, where you live, reduced work, hobbies and activities, etc., before actually pulling the trigger on retirement, so you can confirm that the reality of retirement aligns with your vision for retirement, and you're going to be happy and content once you do fully retire. So you can confirm that the reality of retirement aligns with your vision for retirement, and you're going to be happy and content once you do retire fully. Well, thank you, as always, for joining us for another episode of the show. You can find the show notes at the podcast page of our website, mdwmllc.com/podcast. And I know we mentioned a bunch of prior episodes throughout today's show, so we'll be sure to link those in the show notes as well. And if you have any thoughts to share or questions you'd like to have answered, please feel free to email us at info@mdwmllc.com. Take care, everyone, and we'll look forward to talking to you again soon.
Want even more ideas, tools, and resources on how to make smart financial decisions? Check out the resources section of MD Wealth Management's website at mdwmllc.com, where you'll find additional knowledge and insight from Michigan physicians, including a blog, ebook, and one-page guides. While there, you can also schedule a 15-minute conversation with Andrew and Trent to learn more about what it means to work with the firm and how they serve physicians. If you've enjoyed the content, please leave a review on iTunes and share with your friends and colleagues. Thanks so much for listening. Andrew Mushbaugh and Trent DeBruin are certified financial planners, principals, and co-founders of MD Wealth Management, a registered investment advisory firm in the state of Michigan. All opinions shared in the show are for general information and are not intended to provide specific advice or recommendations for any individual. All performance referenced is historical and no guarantee of future returns. Please consult with your legal advisor, your tax advisor, or your financial advisor before making any decisions.